let me just move us over to Charles and Lynn. Let me introduce you, Lynn. Lynn Murphy, I met her several years back when I was at Commonweal in Bolinas, California. And she is an amazing spirit. At the time when I met her, she had just left by choice a very, very, some would say high power position, in which she just felt like she needed to go and find the answers to many things that she's been pondering. And so she did. And I met her during that time, and it was such a gift. Let me read a little bit more about Lynn's credentials so you get to know a little bit about what she holds. Lynn Murphy has worked in various capacities over the past 25 years: a bilingual teacher, a researcher or scholar, large-scale funder, global movement builder, strategic advisor, and activist in the US and across the global South. And she's currently working as an advisor and a consultant among philanthropists, NGOs, and community projects that are focusing on international education, learning communities, regenerative systems, and ways to work and listen across the divides, and I would add across our differences, to make social change. Lynn holds a PhD in International Comparative Education from Stanford University. Lynn, please join us.
Thank you, Victoria. And I still remember when we met out on the edge of the bluffs with the sea, and those of us who know kind of permaculture know that those edge places are very fertile and very fecund, and appreciate that connection that we've had, and may it continue to bear fruit.
Mm-hmm. May it be so.
May it be so. And I have the pleasure and the honor to host Charles this morning, Charles Eisenstein. He's a well-known author and public speaker and has written several books. His last book, Climate: A New Story. I hope I said the title right, Charles. I mean, I have read it. And he also, over the years, has become a very dear friend and an ally. So it's sincerely just a delight to be here with you today, Charles. He wrote an essay during this time called The Coronation that has been really widely read by a very diverse group of people and has received a lot of comments and reflections. And so we invite him here today to join us and share what's on his heart and the wisdom that comes through. So welcome, Charles.
Hi. Yeah. Hi, Lynn. Happy to be here. Hi.
So perhaps we just begin with a question. Today's theme is a lot around kind of dying and grief. And you wrote this beautiful essay kind of showing us what this moment might be initiating us into. And I just want to begin with a question of what is dying in this moment? And perhaps what is this moment showing us that may need to die?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a cliche almost that you never realize how precious something is until you've lost it. That's one reason why death is so important to being able to live life fully and to accept death and to integrate death as part of life. That the medicine that it brings is that it makes life precious. So that is true of other kinds of loss as well. Even if the loss is temporary, I am actually quite resistant to one of the narratives out there, which is that we're never going to be able to go back to the way things were. In some ways, I don't want to go back to the way things were. In fact, in many ways, I am celebrating the death of, well, I don't know if it's permanent or not, but celebrating the death of mass mindless air travel all over the planet. I'm celebrating the death of well, I'm appreciating that people are cooking more at home now and not eating at restaurants so much. I'm appreciating there's a lot of things to appreciate about this, but much of what we have lost temporarily, I really would like us to reclaim, and maybe even reclaim to a greater degree than we even had before. And I'm speaking specifically of sociality, touch, gathering, and our basic intimacy with the world. Dr. Andrew Fauci said, we're just going to have to get used to never shaking hands again. A new normal is taking hold where it's like, at least where I am, if you're not wearing a mask in public, I mean, you might as well not be wearing your pants. Like that's how quickly it's becoming a taboo. And so these, or play is another thing. Like it's impossible for me to find play dates. I mean, there's no school, and impossible for me to find play dates for my son because everybody's terrified that he's going to infect them. So the preciousness of social interaction, of hugs, of handshakes, of getting together, of dancing together. Like people try to have these dance parties over Zoom, but there are aspects of human relationship that cannot be digitized. And the preciousness of these is becoming starkly apparent to us now that we are cut off from most forms of relating. Anything that cannot be mediated by a computer, we're doing without that for a while. So one thing I hope comes from this is that our appreciation of how precious these things are will inspire us to energetically claim them as a future, because none of this, none of the forms of distancing and separation and control and lockdown that we're experiencing today is anything new. The digitization of life, the migration of life onto computer screens, that's not new either. Distance education replacing in-place education, not new. Social distancing, not new if you look back over a 50-year time span and how much more of life happened in public civic places compared to today. Like all of these are very, very long trends that had seemed inevitable. We just took it for granted that progress consisted in more and more highly digitized life. The future was telecommuting. We took those things for granted. The future was that you order things to come to your house. You don't go out into a public space to acquire them. You depend on globalized supply chains. Like this was considered an inevitability. And now we're being shown, okay, here's what this really looks like taken to the extreme. Are you sure that you want that? Are you sure you want this world of separation and hygiene? And so, yeah, I guess that's how I would frame it in terms of loss and grief. I mean, I could say a lot more about death and stuff. Maybe I'll just leave it at that for the moment and see if you want to follow up with something.
Well, if I'm hearing what you're offering, in a way, you're saying that this is kind of just the next initiatory moment of where our culture has been coming to anyway. So from one way, you could say this isn't necessarily a death. This is kind of an arrival somewhere. So I do want to ask you again, what are you seeing that is dying, or is it our illusion of separation? Is it dying to being kind of in some sort of collective trance with this? But maybe I'll stick with this question for a moment.
Yeah. I don't think that this crisis in and of itself marks the death of the illusion of separation or the story of separation. It is offering us a break in normality and an opportunity to question long prevailing certainties that are being revealed as not certain. I mean, just like how disrupting it is to people, the that what we took for granted as real and permanent is revealed as so fragile, so conditional, that the total breakdown of society is not as far away as we imagined. It doesn't take that much for everything to collapse. So I guess one thing that we might say is dying is our sense of false security. And yeah, it is an initiation, the coronavirus. I mean, that's why I titled it The Coronation, which is an initiation into sovereignty, which comes from becoming conscious of things we were not conscious of before, conscious of choices that had been automatic and not really choices before, conscious of our individual and collective agency in creating the future, where we are temporarily at least liberated from what was seemingly inevitable, and thereby offered, do we want to actually go there? Do we want to choose that? Or do we want to choose something else? Because the massive changes that we've seen in the last 2 months, nothing did that to us, actually. You could say that it's not like, UFOs landed and dictated to us that we were going to change society. When we did that from within, on every level, from the political level, which, with quarantine and lockdown, to the personal level of voluntary social distancing, we made the entire planet made dramatic changes that show us our power. Because if we can make those changes, not because of coronavirus, but in response to it, because you could, I could make actually a pretty strong argument that the response is unnecessary, excessive, even counterproductive. Like there are a lot of heterodox critics, and this now has become so politicized that, like, if you criticize lockdown, now all of a sudden, you're a Trump supporter or something like that, and that's a whole other can of worms that we could open. But I'll just say that I think that a lot of the criticisms of the official narrative have merit, but regardless of whether they are necessary or not, or the right response or not, still we are doing it. We're making these enormous changes that, a change even a tenth this big would have been inconceivable half a year ago. To spend trillions and trillions of dollars on stimulus, economic stimulus, or trillions of dollars on responding to COVID. Like six months ago, if we had said, okay, let's spend trillions of dollars on anything, the answer would have been, we don't have that money. But now it turns out that wasn't true. So here's something that might be dying. It's our assumption that we are helpless and powerless to exert our collective will to change the world. Our power is being shown to us. And the question naturally arises, if we can make such enormous changes for this, what else could we change that we thought was unchangeable, that we just passively accepted and acquiesced to because there was no alternative, because we couldn't afford anything different, because it was impossible, because it was too big a change, because, like, what have we assumed and put into that category that we could actually change? Because, and this is really hopeful to me, because I think we can think bigger than how to restore normal when normal wasn't actually working very well. Now, you've worked in development, you know how normal was not working that well in most of the planet. If you are, a sub-Saharan African, or if you are a wetlands, if you are a whale, if you are a bluefin tuna, if you were a hunter-gatherer or an indigenous peasant, it wasn't working that well. That was obvious. What is a little less obvious is that it wasn't working that well for the elites either. Just look at rates of depression, addiction, suicide, anxiety among the 1%. These are not people who are bursting with joy overall. You don't find those people in Beverly Hills. You don't find the most happy, joy. I don't know. Where have you seen the happiest people on earth, Lynn?
Oh, that's a good question, Charles.
Was it in the Hamptons?
No.
Because you hobnob with the funding world and stuff too, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
So yeah. So do we, you know, so the death of the old normal is something, there's definitely, like, personally even, there's part of me that does want to go back to the old normal.
Mm-hmm.
But there's, I would say, a more, a bigger part of me that is like, finally. Not that life is better now than it was, for me at least. And I mean, this is another thing, like there's a lot of talk about how COVID has disproportionately affected the vulnerable, the precarious, the people of color. What has even more disproportionately affected them is the lockdown. And that's why I'm a bit baffled by those who say that, you know, that it, that it's the white supremacists who want to end lockdown, when, according to the UN World Food Program, 260 million people are facing starvation this year. All of them, or almost all of them, Black and brown people in Africa and South Asia. 260 million people. That is like 500, 1,000 times more than have died from COVID. And they are pretty much invisible to the arithmetic of the debate of lockdown versus opening. So it's like, guess what? Those who have always been invisible and marginalized are still being made invisible and marginalized. And like, I want so much to bring all of those excluded data points into our considerations. And these excluded data points they're not only the, you know, farmers in India whose livelihood is being destroyed, or the people, hundreds of millions, billions of people on earth live hand to mouth, day to day. They make the money that day that they feed their children with that day. And now their livelihoods are interrupted on a mass scale. That is invisible from the seat of privilege. And I want to bring those data points in, and all of the other excluded data points, which include the medically excluded data points. Like, all of a sudden, this, am I going on to too many directions here?
You're good.
Because part of me is like, okay, what about science and non-duality? You know, I'm supposed to go there, but anyway.
You're going there. You're the data point.
Oh, I am actually, right. So here we have decades and decades of exploration and practice, and I would add scientific research, voluminous scientific research into holistic, alternative health practices and therapies, entire professions built around it, that it's so well documented how they boost immunity, increase our resistance to disease, et cetera, even viral diseases, even those that affect the respiratory system. I mean, there's incredible data out there. All of a sudden, when push comes to shove, everybody defaults back to the narrowest orthodoxy. And like, I don't see, yeah, I don't see the CDC or the WHO saying, okay, this is really showing us how fragile our health is, and we have to have a massive paradigm shift to enhance our wellness and strengthen our immunity through inexpensive, non-patented, traditional and new holistic approaches to health. I'm not hearing them say that. In fact, it seems as though that maybe I'm just a little cynical here, But it seems as though the officially permitted responses tend to be the ones that are going to make somebody money, tend to be the patented medicines or the vaccines, not the vitamin D or, you know, the high intravenous vitamin C doses or the astragalus. So why is that? And I'm not saying that, like, I mean, I don't know, some of these alternative approaches might not actually be useful. I don't know, but let's open the door to those. These are another example of the excluded data points. And what about mind-body medicine? I was in a thread with a physician who's like, you know, working at, you know, Harvard or Yale or something like that, like a mainstream, highly credentialed, prestigious individual. And he was saying, you know, I've been doing EFT, emotional frequency, whatever, the thing, the tapping thing, you know. And he's like, there's research that shows that it has 110%, it increases immunoglobulin by 110%, this technique. And immunoglobulin, I can't remember what kind of immunoglobulin, but it was like it binds to coronaviruses and deactivates them. So it's like the perfect therapy. He said, if there were a drug, a pharmaceutical drug that increased IG levels by 110%, it would be a blockbuster. It would be widely prescribed. It would be touted as a triumph. Well, why is this kept out? So we're seeing here in pure form an orthodoxy and an entire, really underneath it, an entire paradigm, an entire worldview that has governed civilization for a very long time and that is reaching an extreme. And we're being kind of bludgeoned into that narrow orthodoxy. And I'm just, you know, this is what I'm like, let's throw open the gates, you know, let's let 100 flowers bloom. Let's bring in the excluded data points, the excluded people, the excluded cultures, the excluded medicines, the excluded ways of knowing, the excluded worldviews. Let's bring them in because this isn't working. Even if you can say, well, you know, we prevented mass deaths from the pandemic, which is debatable, actually, if you know, there's all kinds of controversy about case fatality rates and prevalence and all that. But is this the world that we want to see? Is this the future? Is this the pinnacle of human progress? A world where we have graduated beyond such primitive things as hugs and handshakes, group hugs, dance parties, festivals, churches, gatherings. Is that the future where we are all in an aseptic bubble, literally and figuratively? Is that where we are going? I don't want to live in that kind of world. And I don't think we need to. And paradoxically, the security and the safety that it promises is an illusion. It doesn't even give us what it promises. How healthy are you going to be when you interdict all of the biological and genetic and social information that flows through a healthy person? That's what health is, actually. Health cannot exist in isolation. Health is a relationship or a matrix of relationships. Like you need the bacterial, microbial world to come into your body to be healthy. The immune system depends on it. The immune system requires challenges. And I mean, everybody knows now that our bodies harbor 10 times more bacterial and yeast cells as human cells. That's well known. The role of viruses is not as well known, but viruses are essential messengers of life. They bring information from one cell to another, from one organism to another, even across species boundaries. They're little packets of DNA, and when they enter another being, sometimes that DNA gets incorporated into the host and even into the germline. That's how evolution happens. It's not random mutation and natural selection. It is endosymbiosis and horizontal gene transfer. Like, life does not thrive by keeping itself isolated. So even the promise of security, that control, that this rigid control brings, and we could talk about this. It is a false promise, and we could talk about the same thing when it comes to censorship in the internet. The idea that if you keep the virus of disinformation and misinformation out, then you'll be safe. But what happens to a paradigm when it is rigidly protected from any challenge? The same thing that happens to your immune system when it is protected from every challenge. It becomes weak, it becomes dysfunctional, and it prevents any kind of evolution from happening. So I think I'll take a breath with that.
Thank you.
And like, you know, I'm here I am. I feel like I've been ranting and stuff. And what about the positive, you know? The positive has to be a choice. We're being shown a dystopia so that we can choose otherwise. But it won't happen automatically. Coronavirus is not our savior. It is our initiator. It's an invitation, but it's not in itself going to do anything.
Charles, as you were speaking about the many data points, you and I had a conversation, I don't remember when, maybe a week or two ago, where I said to you, I'm in no way interested in the ideological warfare about who's right now. And I could offer in another moment some of the narrative that is coming out of Africa itself, who often is spoken for or spoken about, but not often listened to and standing. And there is another narrative and data point also coming out in the vein that you were speaking. And those who are interested in that, even the president of Madagascar.
I read about that.
Yeah, looking at different pieces. So all of us, I feel like it's an invitation to open up, to have our blind spots humbly pointed out to us, and see what the work is for us to do, in, to use a word that can sometimes be loaded, but to decolonize the ways that we perceive and what we know and how we are. And in that spirit, I feel to ask you what you're learning about humility these days.
Can I pick up on the Madagascar thread and go there with it?
Sure.
Because I read an article about that too. It was in a Nigerian newspaper. Like, this did not get into, as far as I've seen, it has not gotten into the Western media. Maybe it leaked in eventually, but I saw it on a Nigerian website, and it was that Madagascar was using an herbal medicine to treat COVID, and it was working really well. It was an Artemis, which is a bitter herb. It tends to be anti-parasitical, you know, and they're using it with great success. And he's like, you know, if this weren't coming from an African country, it would receive a lot more attention. But because it's Africans, you know, who have developed it, you know, no one's paying attention to it. And I think that in addition to that, it's also, you know, it doesn't fit into the medical system, the medical pipeline. There's no money to be made from herbal medicine. You can't patent it. So how are you going to fund the clinical trials? Who's going to back up? Who's going to invest all of the energy and the time and the money to get this through the system. Like this, even if every individual in the system thinks it's a good idea to explore African medicine, the systemic mechanisms don't even allow that to happen. So yeah, humility. Where does humility come from? I've asked that question a lot, seeing the arrogance of the dominant civilization. I think usually, at least in my experience, personally, comes from humiliation. When I thought I was right, I thought I knew, thought I was the good guy, and I'm shown, sometimes painfully, that that image was not true. I feel like I think that our culture is still in denial that we don't know how to do this. The response to COVID has been to do even more of what we're already good at and operate even more vigorously from the existing default worldview, which is the worldview of separation and control, the worldview that progress comes through more effectively dominating and controlling, killing, walling off, keeping out, monitoring some kind of other. That's the mindset of the war on terror. That's the mindset of chemical agriculture. That's the mindset of the criminal punishment system. You identify the bad guy and you destroy the bad guy, or at least you keep him out behind razor wire or a border fence, or you just kill the bad guy. Yeah, you drone them, you bomb them. That's also the mindset between the mindset of conventional medicine to a large degree, where you have an illness, you find the pathogen, and then you know what to do. You create antivirals, even that concept, or antibiotics. Or if you haven't been able to do that yet, then you quarantine, you isolate, you lock down, you distance. These are all forms of control. Our civilization has been shown increasingly with greater and greater intensity over the last half century that our technologies of control are not, in fact, ushering in the perfect world, the utopia that science and technology promised us in the first half of the 20th century. And really going back to the Industrial Revolution and the Scientific Revolution, I mean, this was a glorious triumph, one after another glorious triumph that was supposed to bring us into material and social and political and economic paradise. We were supposed to, for example, we were supposed to have conquered all disease by now. Don't you remember? There were medical researchers testifying in Congress in the 1950s and 60s, saying that by the year 2000, we will have conquered all disease. And it seems so obvious, like look at the triumphs that we've recorded already. Wiping out smallpox, wiping out cholera, diphtheria, polio. The common cold is soon to fall, and cancer and heart disease, and lifespans will be 200 years. Life expectancy will be 200 years by the year 2000. I mean, that was confidently predicted. It seemed obvious. Since that time, not only have we seen life expectancy stagnate, but we've seen one new epidemic after another that are not amenable to technologies of control, such as autoimmunity, huge, all kinds of chronic diseases, autism, allergies, depression, addiction. None of these, you You can't solve any of these problems by finding a bad guy and destroying them. So this humiliation has been growing in the shadows. And it manifests as just like a kind of a loss of confidence. I heard a speech by John F. Kennedy recently, a clip from it, it's famous, talking about putting a man on the moon. We do it not because it is easy, but because it is hard. The zeitgeist was we can do anything. There is no limit to what we can accomplish. That confidence that the world was getting better and better and that we knew how to make it better and better. We had the tools, science, technology, reason, the market. It was almost undeniable. The confidence was almost universal. And now the failure of that program is bringing us into humility very slowly. With the response to COVID, I see actually resistance to that. We're doubling down on the technologies of control, both social and medical, that are in general failing us over our lifetimes. So I would like to see humility. Personally, you know, I've really been put through the ringer here because I'm surveying all of these conflicting narratives. I'm, I guess, constitutionally partial to dissent, to questioning authority. But I'm like, am I sure? Maybe authority's right this time. Maybe the best way to handle this crisis is through the lens of pathogenicity. Maybe we do need these lockdowns. Maybe bioterrain theory, which is one of the alternative understandings of disease that I'm very interested in. Maybe that's wrong. How do I know that it's right? Have I really looked at both sides? So I find, you know, I'm involved in many different conversations now. And one thing that they hold in common, that each of these different groups, these different, the promoters of different narratives tend to have in common with each other, is that they're all pretty sure that they're right. And they dismiss, and they don't even look that deeply into their opponent's views. Typically, so say, for example, that you have conventional beliefs about, I don't know, let's just take some of the cliches, vaccines, 5G, glyphosate, you know, it's basically harmless. Like suppose like you have that conventional view. And then somebody posts on your Facebook page an interview with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's infamous for being an anti-vaxxer. Actually, that's actually not that accurate a description of him, but whatever. So are you going to, oh, I think I'll listen to that entire interview? Usually what I see people doing is they'll go to somebody who's a spokesperson for their own side. And what does that person say about Robert F. Kennedy Jr.? So basically seeing all of the alternative narratives through the lens of your own narrative, but not actually visiting their territory and taking them on their own terms. That is what humility is. Humility is to say, maybe I don't know. Humility cannot be achieved as an aspiration, I don't think. It's not like the next virtue that you can add to your spiritual backpack to be a good person. Humility comes as a result of I said humiliation, but it just embodies the truth that actually you never can be sure. The truth that we as human beings are constantly infusing evidence with our own biases, selecting it according to our own beliefs. We tend to believe what fits into our existing worldview and our identity within that worldview. We don't want to believe in convenient truths. So if something comes along that violently contradicts what you believe about the world and about yourself in the world, you're going to be hostile to that, probably. Subject it to intense scrutiny. Who is that person who comes up with that theory? What website is that on? Are they funded by big pharma? You know, like you're going to subject it to hostile scrutiny. Whereas another post comes onto your Facebook page, and this one validates what you believe. Are you going to demand to see the raw data behind that post? Are you going to really look into its sources? Are you going to vet it carefully? Probably not. So this is, I'm just talking about selection bias. And what I would like to I'm going on and on, sorry, but what I would like to see is not only individuals becoming aware of their cognitive biases and opening up to critical thinking and going through an unlearning and unknowing process, but I would like to see institutions do that too, because our institutions are also possessed by a kind of collective confirmation bias, especially in science. As I was like, it's not that they're bad scientists who are closed-minded, it's that the entire system, I mean, if you're a scientist, are you going to get funding and promotion and academic prestige by investigating any of these verboten topics, or you know, just something as simple as a medicine that can't be patented and that doesn't fit into the paradigm? Probably not. So if only the problem were bad people that we could just remove from the system, and then the system would work fine. If only. If anything, it's the system that creates bad people.
Oh, the age-old question in academia, structure versus agency. We won't go into that whole piece right now. Thank you. I feel to ask you one more question, and then we'll go to some of the questions that are coming up from those who've virtually raised their hand. There was a beautiful offering that Reverend Deborah Johnson gave, this image of having to pull out the garden, all the beautiful roses, and well, the garden kind of got pulled out rather. And there was like, oh, this painful loss of beauty in that. And then the gift in that was planting food, something that was needed. And so I guess my question to you is, what are you finding, you know, what needs to be uprooted to lean into what you've written about in many of your essays and many of your books, that some hold on to this phrase of the more beautiful world our heart knows is possible?
Well,
or the other gateway you can move into that is also you speak a lot about sacrifice and what we often have to sacrifice.
yeah. I'm tempted to talk about something quite practical and something very systemic, which is debt. You were saying before our call how you just mentioned that, you know, philanthropists, funders are asking, like, how can we do something about world hunger right now? Because I guess there is this awareness that a lot of people are facing starvation. And generally speaking, if we do not change the current debt system, especially on the international level, but also within nations and on the personal level, then philanthropy and any kind of development, any kind of program meant to alleviate poverty is going to be fighting the tide of the money system and the system of debt. If you have nations like Bolivia or Ecuador or Congo, or, you know, any of these countries that have to continue making payments on their foreign debt, that can only be made in hard currency, that can only be gotten through selling off their natural resources, their forests, their minerals, their labor, their young people, then they're going to continue to be impoverished, no matter how many handouts and how many programs we institute there. So talk about sacrifice, because debt is how the global hegemonic powers maintain their position. What will need to be sacrificed is that power over. And there's no other way around it. And one of the calls, one of the summons of coronavirus is toward an expansion of our compassion, to really ask about the formerly invisible others. How can we take care of you? Because this is a pandemic, a universal affliction that, and this is maybe the most positive thing about it, is that it can bring the entire human species together in solidarity. That global solidarity is incompatible with an extractive debt-based system. If you ask, because the money changer, the creditor has to harden his heart when the debtor can't pay. I'm sorry, you have to find a way to pay. That's called austerity. You can't pay? Well, make do with less. Make do with less food. Make do with no vacation. Make do with no pension. Make do with no medical care. Make do with no education. Because your product, the fruits of your labors have to come to me. And I don't want to hear any complaints. And if you can't pay, I'll make you pay. So that system, the debt system, is at home in the deeper mythology of separation. That here's me, here's you. What happens to you? Tough shit. That's not my concern because we're separate. Your well-being does not necessarily affect my well-being. And if you get really upset, then as long as I have a strong enough military, that doesn't matter either. That's the mythology of separation. So coronavirus is inviting us out of that mythology. It's also inviting us deeper into that mythology, as I was speaking about before, the lockdown and the control and stuff, but it's also inviting us into a universal compassion. And if we accept that invitation, then a lot about our currently established system becomes intolerable. Like, we cannot, when we become aware of the way that the global economy works, we cannot countenance it anymore. So one of the really practical sacrifices that and new directions that can come from this is a fundamental change in our global economic system, which starts, the easiest thing is debt cancellation. But can we afford that? Well, 6 months ago, could we afford a multi-trillion-dollar package for anything? We would have said the money's not there, but it's there. Debt is nothing but an agreement. Agreements can be changed. And then we could talk about extending debt jubilee to other levels as well. So yeah, I'll just offer that into the conversation, because sometimes, the medical conversation, the spiritual conversation doesn't get to these nitty-gritty economic domains.
Yeah. Thank you, Charles. On the debt cancellation piece, and for those who may follow that, just notice to what Charles was speaking about before, about selection bias and the way institutions hold ways of seeing and knowing. What is it when the frame is around debt cancellation, debt forgiveness, and or reparations and or restorative justice? What does that lead us to imagine and support in solidarity? with different frames.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, thank
Yeah,
you.
I think that in a way it's a less triggering frame than reparations.
Mhm.
Practically speaking, the debts that countries hold now and that many individuals hold are the legacy of a historical power relationship. So if you want to right that historical wrong, cancel the debt. And you don't have to go into this blame and it's my fault and it's, it's the white people's fault. And like, let's just fix the injustice without making it a matter of identifying perpetrators and victims. Like, it's not, and this I guess could be a long conversation, but if you actually want the injustice to stop, no amount of soul searching and confession of your privilege is going to stop it if you don't change the system by which injustice and inequality is continued. Yeah.
Lord, in this moment, we will take some other questions while that just lands in everyone's beings and hearts. And yes, Charles, I would like to have a further conversation with you about some of these pieces. And for now, I want to hear more voices from the circle. And so I turn it to Mauricio and Zaya to help us with that.
Wow. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Charles. Wow.
I have to say something myself personally, Charles. I know you probably 7-8 years. I have not heard one word you said that I don't wish my mouth had expressed. Every concept every time I heard in those years, everything you said, I wished I would have the clarity and the I wish it comes out from here. So it's an honor, and wow.
Thank you, Charles, for bringing all these pointers that we have been weaving throughout the week. And I feel like you really brought it all together in a way that it actually makes sense with science and non-duality, even though we haven't used those words. This is all part of the fabric of reality, and you're pulling all the threads that we, for one reason or another, have been in denial and not wanting to see that they are part of the makeup of life and who we are. Timothy, are you, I know you had your hand since the beginning, so I'm not sure if this was a mistake or you would like to share.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes. Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. My name is Jessica. My husband is Tim. Thank you so much for this gathering, and thank you, Charles, for continuing to give voice to these critical issues. I want to say greetings from the Commonwealth of Dominica in the Eastern Caribbean. We are a COVID-free country. We have no cases of COVID in Dominica. And in fact, the entire region of 22 countries has only had 84 deaths from COVID in 22 island nations. But we are going to bear the brunt of the shutdown in tourism, of this mass unemployment. But I want to talk about structural changes that you brought up. And I want to ask a question for Charles, because yesterday Gabor spoke about the problem of being able to change these institutions, because fundamentally we can't move forward if these institutions stay the same. So Charles, what are your thoughts on mass movements like Extinction Rebellion or the climate youth strikes to make positive changes? Do you think it's possible? And if so, what would that look like from a social movement perspective?
Yeah, I think it's possible. However, the problem with these mass movements is that they get very easily co-opted, and not just in obvious ways by money and power, academic appointments, et cetera, but also by the unconscious narratives that run our society on a deeper level. So for example, to take Extinction Rebellion, here is a totally valid primal protest at our destruction of the world. and these people, the Fridays for the Future, like how can I go to school and be acculturated to this world-destroying machine? Like, no way, I'm not going to participate in that. And so that energy, that heroic, beautiful energy then gets channeled onto what eventually comes down, what I call carbon reductionism, the translation of the dying of the biosphere into a matter of one bad thing. Like, that's the same pattern. Find the bad guy, find the one cause that then you can exercise technologies of control to bring down. And so you end up with all that energy being channeled toward things that are actually making the problem worse, such as industrial scale biofuels, such as geoengineering ideas. So that's just like one case study of that illustrates the necessity for social movements to question, unlearn the basic programming of what I would say is the story of separation, but our dominant institutions, and not just the outward institutions, but the ideological institutions. We are, it's like Einstein said, the problem cannot be solved from the same mindset that created it. And this isn't to say don't take any action, but really what it's saying is that, for lack of a better word, self-inquiry or spirituality, the excavation of the inner structures has to go along with any social movement. And when that happens, as that happens, the transformative power of social movements will radically expand, because they'll understand what's the real source of the dysfunction of our society. So, like, one example might be a universal debt strike. That might be but anyway, I don't know. I hope that at least offers some more food for thought.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I did say maybe this is a bit of a practice for the great general strike that's going to come.
Yeah.
Lockdown.
And a lot of it also just comes down to basic land rights. I mean, for people in my culture, like, almost the only action available to us is digital action. Or maybe the most potent digital action is to not pay. But other places of the world, like Via Campesina would be a social movement that I think has a lot to teach us. Anyway, long conversation, but yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you.
Thank you for this question. Beautiful. Don Hudson.
Don. Don?
You can unmute
Don,
yourself.
can you unmute yourself?
Okay.
Yes.
Hey, Charles, I'm coming from the Commonwealth of North Carolina, where we do have coronavirus. And like 20 years ago, when I first became a journalist from not sports anymore, but doing like real journalism, I thought, well, climate change is finally going to bring the world together. And that shows how incredibly naive I was. And a couple of my friends started this big charity to teach climate change to nonprofits and how to deal with it. And they were incredibly wealthy people, and they moved from Charlotte to Georgetown, somewhere in DC, where Obama and Ivanka and Jared live. And, they have chickens in their backyard in this neighborhood. But when it came time for their daughter's wedding, they had a wedding, a destination wedding in Mexico in San Miguel de Allende. And then when I look at like Bloomberg, and he's got $60 billion, and he wants to maybe spend $1 billion of it to stop Trump. And I'm like, and so I don't have a problem when I see people that are on the side of climate change to fixing it. They're still spending excessively. So what I'm noticing is people really don't want to give up their power. They've fought so hard to get that money or get that prestige or get into a position where they could help other people fight climate change, but they want to hold their franchise so desperately. But, you know, look, I mean, there's 8 people have the wealth of.
Sorry to interrupt you. We
Go.
have a lot of people who would like to speak.
Okay.
You mind?
Go to the
Go to the question.
So the question, Charles, is there, what is in the human psyche that can't, if you really believe this is happening, why are you not spending your wealth to stop it?
Uh-huh.
There's my question.
There's a few things going on here. One is the same thing that's going on with the social movements, that people, that the desire, the philanthropic desire to change the world gets channeled through the unconscious assumptions of the world that they're trying to change, and thereby gets channeled into things that don't actually create much of a deep systemic change. If you have $1 billion and you're trying to use it to stop climate change, what do you do with that? The organizations that provide the easiest receptacle for that money are very much operating in standard paradigms of reductionism and the geomechanical view of the world and so forth. But to answer your question, the problem that the reason that people have so much trouble letting go of their money and power, well, for one thing, it's because they don't know that they're going to die. Francis Weller will probably talk about this soon. And that's a bit of a leap I just made there. What does that have to do with it? Because normally, if you have integrated death as an inevitable fact of life, and you don't live in a culture of death denial and youth fetishization that pretends that you're never going to die, then none of these personal acquisitions of money, property, and power are actually that valuable. Often it's when people reach near the end of life that they finally start to realize that, but not even then sometimes. Even our medical system seems to pretend that we can prolong life forever. Even the phrase saving lives, that is totally incoherent. There's no such thing as saving lives. There's only postponing deaths. So when the truth of impermanence and of death is not integrated, then it makes a lot more sense to pursue the endless expansion of the separate self. Another reason that people have a lot of trouble letting go of their money and power is that these are substitutes for things that are sorely missing in our culture. Money is a substitute for security. And where does real security come from? Traditionally, it came from community. It came from belonging in the world. It came from a rich, robust constellation of intimate relationships to nature and to people. Almost nobody has that right now. If something bad happens to you, most people, they can't rely on their community. They feel alienated from this world. And if that's the case, money is the next best thing to give you a semblance of the security and connection that we are lacking in modern society. So yeah, it's not so simple as, okay, there's this bad thing in us called greed that we have to conquer, or greedy people that we have to remove. Greed is a systemic symptom. And therefore, and if that leaves you feeling confused and helpless, that's good. We need to go through confusion and helplessness to deprogram from the solution templates, which are usually around some kind of control, the response patterns that keep us running around the maze endlessly. So yeah, that's, I'll end with there and see if we have time for another question.
Take one more question. Yeah, Susan.
Susan Hill.
Yeah. Yeah, hi. Thank you. I just love your talk and how broad and you go into every aspect, and it's beautiful. Thank you. And so my question is, what can someone, like one person, do? Like, would prayer work? I know some people just pray all day. And of course, the change of yourself, like be the change you want to see. And if everybody does that, yeah, if we all get to know ourselves, the world will change automatically. But somehow, as one person, you feel kind of powerless. And yeah, the social movements, but that also seems like, what can we do there? So what would your recommendation be as one person who really wants to be able to do something and really wants to work on themselves, or realize themselves, but still feel powerless?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. That's a good question. John Perkins quotes the Dalai Lama as saying, responded to a woman's question about prayer. He said, yeah, prayer is good. Prayer for peace, is good. But if that's all you do, you are wasting your time. Prayer, I understand as, among other things, as a form of preparation. You are declaring to yourself how you will respond. If you're praying for peace, then you are preparing yourself to respond to a situation as an agent of peace. If you are praying for healing, you are saying, if I have a role to play in this healing, I am ready. So prayer is a way to make you ready to participate in the world that you are praying for. And yeah, like this question of what does it matter if I am being the change? What does it matter if I am making my individual changes when everybody else, they have free will, they're not doing it. What good does it do? We have to understand, I've talked at SAND before about morphic resonance, and when we understand that self and other, self and universe are not fundamentally separate, then any change within or in our private realm is part of a larger change. And that is actually a prayer. Any change that you make, any choice that you make, is a declaration of wanting to live in a world that is aligned with that choice. And it invites further opportunities. Any choice is an offering to that which is witnessing us. And it attracts further opportunities to act in accordance with that choice. Ultimately, though, this despair comes from a Newtonian view of the workings of the world based on force and mass, in which you are one little separate individual. When we understand that the world itself is intelligent, is conscious, and that the future, and there's not just one future, there are many futures, each of which is part of a mythic being that is unimaginably powerful. Then we understand that to serve a particular future means that we can trust that future, that being, you could even call it God, to deploy you exactly where your gifts are needed. Our job is only, as Gigi Coyle says, to ask, what is mine to do? To train ourselves to recognize what is mine to do, to listen to the communications of that being, I call it the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible, that we serve. And how does that being communicate to us? It communicates through the organs, especially the heart. And it alerts us to our role in this grand plan that no human being could come up with. And if a human being does come up with a plan for saving the world, I am really suspicious of it. Like the last guy who had a really comprehensive plan to save the world was Adolf Hitler, to save the world from genetic degradation. Like, world saving is a problem. But there are powers greater than human that do know exactly what the plan is and can signal to us through our hearts, i.e. through our care, like what actually makes you care? What makes you care so much that you will put aside the power and the money and the prestige because you want to serve that? That's the point of spiritual practice from this view, is to to increase your sensitivity to those messages and your trust in those, when the mind might say that's useless, that's naive, that doesn't matter, you're just one person. That message could bring you into political engagement. It's not just like the personal realm. But what unites the personal and the political from this perspective is that you are guided by a larger intelligence that speaks to you through the heart. So that's like a short version of how I would answer that if I had, an hour, but hopefully it's again, offer some food for thought.
Yeah, thank you.
Maurizio and Zaya, I feel that was a natural place for us to just rest. And sincerely, Charles, from my heart to you over there, sitting there in front of your
my tapestry, yeah.
Your tapestry.
You see the goddesses? There's goddesses there. And there's a warrior back there, and he left his sword and helmet on the other side of the goddesses.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
From my heart, I sincerely want to thank you for being with us here today. I know you've done many interviews in recent days, and for to moving into your heart and into your soul's entelechy and your mind's brilliance, and really offer something that asks us to look deeper, to question not just our assumptions, but actually really understand how our biases are functioning in this way, and bringing us back to the heart and into this way with, I perhaps might say, guidance or the divine, how we be anew. Yeah. And thank you for your companionship over the years.
Yeah, thanks, Lynn.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Hope I haven't excluded the mind there. But anyway, there's more to say about that. But thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Charles. No, you have included so much, and you have, there is a lot here to take in and be and digest. And I love, the invitation of all the mystics is the same, the practice of not this, not that, really question everything we grasp on and believe with certainty. And you really eloquently brought this and applied it to the current situation in our world, and where we're addicted to control and avoidance of pain. You invited us to step fully with our hearts and meet all. Because, like Deborah Johnson said something beautiful at the beginning of the week, we cannot heal that which we don't feel. So really open our hearts to all that wants to be met and felt. Thank you, Lynn, for holding space for this beautiful conversation. And thank you, Charles.
Yeah. Thank you, Zaya, Mauricio.
In person next time.
It's so good. People said we want Charles for president in the chat, and I'll vote for that. Maybe we'll make you the sand president.
Yeah, right. I love sand, but Mauricio, like you're always so hostile to me. Like I have to get over that every time you could be a little bit more welcoming.
I know.
Yeah.
I cannot do any better.
All right.